Imagine leading a historic college, securing millions in grants, yes, millions, and shaping the future of diversity in biomedical sciences, all while balancing the joys and challenges of family life. Today, we have a remarkable guest who has done just that. Dr. Cynthia Warrick, the trailblazing former president of Stillman College and a powerhouse in education and health services, joins us to share her inspiring journey and invaluable insights. Whether you're an educator, an administrator, or simply passionate about making a difference, you don't want to miss this. Stay tuned for a conversation that's sure to enlighten and empower. Hello, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm great, and I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. All right, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Cynthia Warrick, and I'm so happy to finally get to interview you, even though I've known you for a long time. I feel like this is my own little piece of heaven that I just have you all to myself for this time period and get to ask you some pressing questions just about education and a little bit of your professional background. So I appreciate you joining us today. All righty. So, okay, I want to start off with a little bit of an icebreaker. Tell us something like a guilty pleasure that you're watching right now, like a TV show or anything that like a movie, a series that you're streaming.
Oh, well, I watch Bridgerton, and
Ooh.
I like, just to see the period costumes, and the acting is really good, and it's just it's a different kind of storyline than what we're accustomed to.
Yes, I love some Bridgerton. I have not watched haven't started this new season yet, and I avoid anytime I see somebody talking about it. So I have to skip past their social media posts because I don't want any spoilers. I already know it's good, so I want to like watch them all back to back. I like to binge all at once. So yes, I love me some Bridgerton as well.
And I'm a serial Hallmark watcher, so
I
like happy endings. So
yeah.
so that puts me to sleep in the evening because I don't want to have drama, right before I go to bed.
You know what? And that's something to think about. I know there are some people out there that love the crime stories, the true crime stories. And I'm like, how can you fall asleep with that stuff?
Yeah, my husband likes those. I don't.
And my mom would talk about my dad watching Gunsmoke and he would fall asleep on it. She's like, I can't sleep with all that shooting and stuff. So it's funny how the different things that we need to kind of calm us down. And for me, my background, I love Bridgerton too. I recently watched it's on Hulu, but it's a series called Shogun. It's really good. It's just short. I think it's just like a little mini series. It's really good, but it talks about the Japanese shogun and kind of how it came to be. It's like a realistic fiction. It's really good, and they took a lot of time to make sure everything was like culturally accurate and everything. So I watched all the behind the scenes. I love doing that. Like I like to see how things are made. So that's been what I've been watching. Well, I finished watching that, and it was good because it had just the right amount of drama and action. So my husband and I we watched it together, and that was kind of like our little date night, with all these children that we have now. That's our escape. watching
Right.
little shows together.
Good, good.
Okay, so I want to dive into like the beginning of your career. So I'm going to title this show From Pharmacy to College Presidency. And it, you know the reason why I talk about that because of when I discovered about your family background. So could you talk about a little bit of your family background and how that kind of led you to Howard University?
Wow. Okay. I don't want to talk too long about this because that's a long story. But I guess I owe a lot to my parents
Mhm,
and my grandparents and great grandparents. So my great grandmother on my mother's side was an educator.
mhm,
And so she sent my grandfather and his sister to Howard University very a long time ago.
okay.
And and I didn't even know it when I decided to go to Howard. I wanted to go into healthcare field because I really wanted to help people,
Mhm,
but I didn't. But I'm a germaphobe, so I didn't want to touch sick people. So so I said, well, pharmacy, I won't have to do that.
right.
So that's why I chose pharmacy. And at the time, there were very few pharmacy schools. Well, there are still a few pharmacy schools with HBCU pharmacy schools like Xavier and
Mm,
Florida A&M, Texas Southern, and Howard. And so I chose Howard because my aunt was working in Washington, D.C. And in middle school, my dad had to fly to Washington and he took me with him. And so I
mhm,
visited the campus and visited all the sites in Washington, D.C. So I kind of like said, yeah, I think I'd like to go there. And then, of course, all of the African American history that's made surrounding Howard. So I just
mhm,
felt I wanted to get away from home. I didn't want to
mhm,
stay in Texas. And so that's why I went to Howard, and it's made the difference because I guess when you're there, you really don't think about the commitment that others have made before you. But when you
mhm,
graduate, you're kind of like, oh, wow, now I have to do something amazing, like
mm,
all of these other Howard alums. So that's when, I finished pharmacy school, and I guess I was a trailblazer in pharmacy because I was one of the first African Americans to go into pharmaceutical sales for a
mm,
pharmaceutical company. And then I was the first pharmacist hired by the HEB grocery company in San Antonio to put grocery
mm.
stores in their pharmacies. And
Wow,
yeah, yeah. And so then I opened my own pharmacy. My dad's an entrepreneur. And so I felt, yeah, I want to do that. And then you
mhm,
have control over what you offer, the services to the community. And
mhm,
so I did that. And then there were pharmacy technicians that I hired in my store, and I usually took like young high school with girls to Texas Southern's pharmacy homecoming every year, so they would be exposed to pharmacy in college. And so when they couldn't get organic chemistry at our local community college, St. Philip's, which is an HBCU,
mhm,
I kind of got upset about that. And then the board of trustees of the college district hired a white president for our HBCU, and the
mhm,
community was just up in alarm. Everybody was, because this was
mhm,
founded by a Black woman, Artemisia Bowden. And
mhm,
I decided to run for the board, to serve on the board so I could make decisions about ensuring that St. Philip's had those classes that students needed for pre-med and pre-pharmacy, and that we'd have a voice that is
mhm,
going to speak for the community on the board.
mhm.
The community was still very upset about that selection.
Wow. So I did not even know that. So when it comes to being on like a higher ed board, um, what does that entail? Like,
Mhm.
what should a college president look for in a board member?
Yeah. Well, so that was, I had been on a lot of nonprofit boards in the community.
Hmm.
And so I kind of knew the expectation of those boards, but the community college boards in Texas, those trustees are elected. So you have to
Mm.
run a campaign and people vote for you. And so there were three candidates. One was a kind of an interim because he was filling a vacant slot. And then the other was a pastor. He was a physician. The other was a pastor in San Antonio. And so you run an election. So I had a campaign manager, campaign staff. My dad
Wow.
was very involved in politics. So ads and, we didn't have the internet then. So
Wow.
this
Yeah.
is the 80s. So I'm dating myself. So,
So you had those boots on the ground for real.
oh yeah, yeah. So going door to door, door hangers, all of that stuff, raising money to really make a difference. And so then I made a runoff election, and the board it's pretty political for public boards, like community
Mm.
colleges and public institutions, because there's a lot of contracts and types of capital projects. And so they kind of can lend a lot of influence in terms of who gets these big
Mm.
contracts. And
Right.
so the interim position that they had on the board, and their 10 board members, um, they said, well, we know the community's upset about us putting the white president at St. Philip's. Let's hire a black chancellor for the whole community college district that would be over all of the colleges. And there are like 6 or 7 at that point in San
Mhm.
Antonio. And so they hired Dr. Ivory Nelson, who is African American, and he became the chancellor over the college district. So they thought that that was going to give the interim trustee more leverage, so he could
Mm.
say, oh, well, we didn't hire a black president for St. Philip's, HBCU, but we did hire a black chancellor for the whole college district. And
Mm.
but I beat him anyway, so in a runoff.
Okay.
And so that was interesting. So you learn, I was on the budget and finance committee, I was on the
Mm.
policy and planning committee. And so those areas are really important in terms of policies. We had to address some issues with people employing their relatives and not being qualified. So
Mm.
establishing policies that are going to have fair housing, fair human resources policies, and also budget and finance and trust. And community college boards meet monthly. So
Okay.
so you're a monthly commitment. You don't get paid. It's really a service that you're doing for the community.
Mhm.
And so I learned a lot. And I guess when I was going to those monthly board meetings and seeing what the chancellor did and what the presidents of the various community colleges did, and I had operated my own pharmacy for 5 years.
Mhm.
So I had finally broken even, and I was like, oh, I could do this. And
Okay.
so that's when I decided to go back to school and get a master's and a PhD, so I would be eligible to go into higher education.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about your transition into you're pursuing your terminal degrees, but you started teaching in the classroom, correct?
Yeah, during my doctoral, and I got my
Okay.
doctorate at George Mason University in Virginia. And
Okay.
so because I had a master's, then I'm able to teach at the undergraduate, at the baccalaureate level.
Mhm.
So I was teaching international environmental policy and environmental policy courses while I
Mhm.
was completing my doctorate in environmental science and public policy.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that journey, that part of your journey where
Mhm.
you're teaching at the undergrad level while you're pursuing your PhD. I was able to talk to Dr. Golar, Dr. Norman Golar from Stillman about his journey doing that and the things he learned. What are some things that you learned about education or you as an educator during
Mhm.
that time period?
Well, I think you have to have a lot of time management is important because I had two children. I had recently divorced, so I was a single parent. And, and so my children were in middle school and they were, they had activities, sports, and music.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ensure that I could attend their events as
Yeah.
well as cooking dinner and all those same responsibilities that you have as a parent,
Mhm.
and as well as really instituting I guess the discipline and the commitment and the work ethic that I think students need to have in order to be successful.
Mhm.
So I think that part was really interesting. When I went to my master's at Georgia Tech, that's pretty much when the internet was becoming more active. And so when I got to George Mason and started teaching, I really used the internet and used technology in the classroom. And so I was one of the early adopters. In fact, I was an early adopter in my pharmacy. My pharmacy I opened in 1984, fully computerized.
Mhm.
So I really wanted to do that. I mean, I just like technology,
Mhm.
and that enabled me to introduce technology and put quizzes online and use different techniques. So at that time it was Lotus Notes, and then Blackboard came aboard. So those were the things, the
Mhm.
tools. I started learning how to use those tools and how to get students to get out of their comfort zone and really start using technology, because that was a transition from paper, pen and paper, to the computer.
Okay, so you taught those courses, you got your doctorate.
Mhm.
Once you got your doctorate, did you already have a job before? I know you had your pharmacy, but um, what was going on right when you were like defending your dissertation and then you're about to walk
Mhm.
across that stage? Kind of tell us what you saw, like, oh, this is where I'm gonna go next.
Yeah, so actually I'm doing kind of like you, Rose. I think it's really important for undergraduate students to remain connected to their faculty, especially the faculty that supported them through their education. And certainly pharmacy school is a professional school, so it's a lot more demanding, and so you see the same faculty all the time, so
Mhm.
you go through. And at that time it was a 5-year program. We had an accelerated 4.5-year program, so you become very familiar with the faculty and the deans, etc. And
Mhm.
so one of my former biomedicinal chemistry professors became the dean. And so I would go to homecoming and go to campus and visit with them, just like
Mhm.
you do when you go to homecoming. You go
Yeah,
see your favorite professors, and
right.
and then Dr. Tillang had become the dean, and so he had been following my career for a long time, and he knew I was getting my doctorate, and so really before I finished, he asked me to come and join the faculty at my alma mater at Howard University in the College of Pharmacy. And I remember he said, Cynthia, I need you to give me 3 years to show Howard pharmacists don't just fill prescriptions.
Mm.
And so I had a job. I interviewed for some other jobs, but I knew that I was going to go to Howard because it's home.
Right.
And so that's where I started my faculty appointment on the faculty, along with people who taught me. So that was really,
Wow.
yeah. So they became, first they were my professors, and then they became my colleagues.
Wow, that is amazing. See, people, you don't burn bridges.
Yeah.
Don't burn. You have to think long and hard, about about the people that you come across. And I value that a lot, as you mentioned before, just staying in contact, because I tell my younger sister this all the time. I'm like, I always hated that I did not have an older sister to look after me and kind of show me the ropes. I kind of felt like I was moving through life on my own, kind of figuring things out. So I think once I got to like high school, I really started to to cleave towards different teachers that I loved. And then even going into college, I said, okay, this person, I love them. I love what they do. I got little tidbits from everybody, oh, they're really good at this, or they're really good at this, and I need somebody in my life like that. So I always treasure people that know more than me. That's just my thing. Like, and so that's really amazing. You went from being the student to the teacher right before, and I'm sure that was very rewarding to see for your professors that see you move up, and they're like, wow, they're so proud of you. So I know that was a good
Yeah,
feeling.
just like a lot of my former students, and
Mm-hmm.
I still provide letters of reference and recommendation for students that I've taught or that I've mentored, not necessarily, because I reached out for every time I was changing positions. Then I had my Howard mentors to ask them to write letters and service references. So I had that history and that context of doing that. And it's really important because you want to think about, well, what are they going to say about me in
Right.
this letter? And so if you haven't developed that good relationship, it's going to be just a menial, letter. It's not going to be anything that's
Like substantive.
yeah,
Where,
it's
yeah.
just going to be, yes, I had her in my class, and she was okay, and she did the work.
Very basic.
Yeah, real basic. So, so that part. So you really have to be thinking about that while you're an undergrad. And I guess because you and I were very similar at Howard, I was involved in student government. So I knew I didn't know the president well, but I had met him when I was there, but I knew the dean of the school very well. And so I was, I knew my professors. And so developing those relationships while you're a student, and certainly being in student government and developing those leadership skills really help you take on more leadership.
Awesome. Yes. And so now I want to pivot to you going into administrative roles in higher ed. So can you talk about the first higher ed admin role that you got, and kind of how, like, what that transition looked like to go from the classroom or the lecture hall into admin
Yeah.
in higher ed?
So, and this just tells the beauty of relationships and connections. So I was on the faculty of the University of Texas School of Public Health right after I left Howard. And there was a position at FAMU, Florida A&M in Tallahassee, that I was interested in, and it was the executive director of the Institute of Environmental Science.
Okay.
And I was involved. My research was involved in environmental justice, and I knew some folks there that had been engaged in that work. And I went to the interview, and and then the executive director was Larry Robinson, who's now currently the president of FAMU.
Wow.
Yeah, so all these connections. And so I didn't get that job. But when I interviewed, one of my friends when I was in pharmacy school was Henry Lewis, who was the dean of the College of Pharmacy at Florida A&M. And so he summoned me while I was on campus. He heard I was on campus, summoned me to come and talk to him. And so I went over, and he said, if you don't get that job, I've got a job for you. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let me think about it. And so I didn't get the director job, but he offered me a job as chair of environmental occupational health in the Institute of Public Health in the College of Pharmacy. So that was my first administrative job, from faculty to chair.
Oh, okay. So tell us a little bit about what that transition was like for you, and maybe and I guess I want you to speak to people that might be in faculty roles in higher ed right now, and they're thinking, oh, would I work in a chair position or something? So could you maybe talk about some of the ways you had to maybe change your train of thought or how you worked, and just how different that looked?
Yeah, well, I had already developed my research, so I was already funded by the DOD and NIH. So I had brought research with me to FAMU from UT and from Howard. So, and then I had my focus has always been on students and their outcomes.
Okay.
And so I think I'm always looking for ways to connect students to opportunities. So as the chair, you use your network to facilitate opportunities for students. You do the day-to-day work of chair is really ensuring that the courses are being offered, that students are enrolled, that you have faculty to teach the courses. So that's just the regular kind of work of a chair. And you have to serve on committees, and so you're part of that college administration. So learning how to manage that and do that, and everybody is using technology at this juncture. So learning that technology, advising students, all of those things, assessment, and thinking about accreditation. So participating in the accreditation processes. So all of those things are part of being the chair. And then, you kind of, but I take it a little further, because I really like to ensure that the students, especially in my department and in my classes, have opportunities to connect to whomever, whatever opportunities they're interested in once they leave the graduate program. Because this is a graduate. I've only taught since getting my doctorate, I've only taught in graduate and professional schools. So I'm always interacting with students at the graduate level. And so connecting them to opportunities for their next role. And that's what, that's going to help build their resume so they get that next position and next opportunity.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about the next step, being a college president. So let's talk about your first time going into that, and the next kind of line of questions are going to be around just being a college president.
Okay. Well, first I moved from chair to dean.
Okay.
And I was a dean of math, science, and technology at Elizabeth City State. And the reason why I was a good candidate for that was because they had a joint pharmacy program with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So they had a satellite campus of pharmacy. And so they needed a dean over the sciences that had a pharmacy background to work with that school on accreditation issues and understanding that. And then they needed someone with a science background, and they had an environmental science program as well. So there aren't very many people with this combination of degrees.
Yeah.
So that was the good fit, in terms of being a dean. And then, just looking at, I guess what I do is I pretty much study positions, and and a dean is a great position because that's just like being a president. It's a CEO of a college. So you're hiring faculty, you have a budget, you have, all of those things that make the institution operate. You recruit students, you have research, all those things that, generate revenue for the college, as well as better student outcomes. So your goal is to really have students graduate and do that. And the presidency is just the same thing on a holistic level. It's everybody, all of those. And then you also, if it's a residential campus, and you have to deal with the housing and all of the other things, the food and all of those other things are added on from, the deanship to the presidency. So you have to be thinking about that. And I guess since I was always interested or looking to be a CEO or president, I always started looking at who in my network has the skill sets that are needed for all those other things that I don't know how to do. Or that, because the president can't do everything by himself.
Right.
But you've got to have colleagues and develop a team of individuals who have those various expertises in order to operate, the campus efficiently and effectively.
Okay. So that is, I've always wondered that, like, okay, if I'm a college president, this is my first time doing it. I don't know how a food program works. So, I've wondered that, like, how does somebody even get into it and be successful in all these other kind of what people don't think about, we don't think about, okay, you have grounds people, you have people that are, the little people of the college, but they make a huge impact on the day-to-day, how the campus runs on a day-to-day basis.
On recruitment and retention, which are key in terms of attracting students to the campus and then keeping them there and then graduating them. And so it's really important to focus on the students, and that's what I've always done. And really, how can they have the very best experience of their life? Because when you go to college, and I remember my college days, those were the best days of my life. I didn't have to work. I had to go to school, but I had to go to class and do that work. But everything else that's around it, all of the other activities and meeting new people and developing friendships and joining organizations like sororities and fraternities and joining, other things. It's like, you're just experimenting, and you're a free person. You're free from family. So you're on your own, and you're kind of like, oh, I'm growing up. And then you have these friends that you grow up with who become friends for life. And it's just, so I always looked at it as how can I make this the best place so students will have the best experience. And so I hire people that have, or I ask them to have that same perspective. Sometimes they don't, because a lot of people look at things as a job, but I really look at it as it's a business. And operating, my own business was the same thing. How can I ensure my customers get the kind of service that they need and have that experience and have a relationship with me? So, so that they'll keep coming back to me
Right.
to be their pharmacist. And so now, I turn to how can I make this campus a best place so these students will come and stay.
Awesome. Okay, so what is for your, let's just kind of look back at your first presidency.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that you wish that you knew, some things that you wish that you knew then,
Mm-hmm.
that you know now that you wish, oh, I wish I would, if I could go back in time and tell my that first year self,
Mm-hmm.
hey, do this or don't do that. What are some things that you learned that you were like, that's something
Yeah.
I kind of, some, even whether they were challenges or good things?
So I think the thing that you don't get in the academy with any other job is learning how to interact with the board of trustees.
Mm.
And I think that helped me. So, and I've always been pretty direct.
Mhm.
So I think, I could have tempered some of my comments,
Yeah. Okay.
because those relationships are important.
Mhm.
And I think you really need to get off on the right foot with, your board chair and your vice chair and the board,
Mhm.
because the board is who hires the president. And
Mhm.
my first presidency was at South Carolina State, and public boards are very different from private boards. And
Okay.
so I learned that, that public boards tend to be much more political. So I was
Mhm.
engaged with the governor and,
Mhm.
and state legislators and congresspersons. And, I had been engaged with congresspersons before
Mhm.
as a dean, but not with the governor and not with, not with those type of higher level folks. But as you're the president, you're dealing with a different set of people that influence the resources that come to the institution.
Mm. Gotcha. So, yeah, you definitely want to make sure, okay, I can't talk too reckless because now it might impact my money coming into my
Oh yeah,
institution.
yeah.
Oh,
And I
okay.
did that on the second presidency I had, and I'm at a town hall, and I'm thinking, oh, you can just say, I was just thinking what was on my mind about how um, governors were balancing the budgets on the back of higher education,
Mm.
balancing state budgets. So back in those days, they were cutting the funding to state institutions by a significant amount. And I mentioned that in a town hall of just that institution. And then I get a
Mm.
call from the governor's office that
What?
says, "Oh, Dr. Warrick, we thought you liked us, and we heard what you said." So
Oh.
I think you have to be really careful about the language you use,
Mhm.
especially in a public audience,
Mhm.
and certainly your interactions with the board and legislators and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
from those experiences, I've become very good at that.
Mhm.
But I wish I didn't have to learn it the hard way. I wish I had known. But I think faculty and administrators at institutions today, and this is even in the K-12 world, it
Mhm.
would be helpful to start developing those relationships with legislators and
Mm.
elected officials early on, so that you understand how those politics and how the resources come into institutions. And I think that's one
Mhm.
of the things that faculty tend not to understand is how do you operate, how do you get funds to operate. And there's a
Mhm.
disconnect between understanding that somebody's paying tuition and fees. Either somebody, got a, even at the K-12 level, the state is
Right.
providing funds so that these students can go to school. So it's like somebody's paying for it.
Right.
The money's just not coming out of the blue for your paycheck and your benefits.
Right.
So,
Right.
so understanding where that's coming from, wherever you are, and like a school board and superintendents, and understanding where that's coming from, and then building and developing those relationships so early on, so that they can see you as someone that they would call on for information and even advice about certain legislation, certain things they're thinking about doing. They might call you and say, well, we're thinking about this. How will this impact your institution? So, but they're not going to do it if they don't know you.
Right. Okay. So I want you to talk to us about, I guess, the process of becoming a college president, and what people can expect. So let's just say there's someone out there that is thinking about, they heard there may be a presidency opening up. What advice would you give them? And what advice would you give them? And can you kind of talk to us regular folk about the process of becoming a college president?
Yeah. Well, usually there's an advertisement for the position, and they'll have a description about what they're looking for in the next president. They'll describe the campus. They'll describe, how many students, the different disciplines, etc. And so what you should be looking at is, does this campus fit my background and what I'm interested, how can I, and what I can contribute as a leader? Does it fit my background? And so when I look at institutions, I'm looking at, do they have some health science type of programs? Are those programs that I can influence and make a difference in? Or is it, are there some initiatives that, like I've had a business, so I'm very, very astute in economic development and research. Is this a campus that's going to have opportunities for those types of things? How can I facilitate more research here, using my network of people, using my everything that I bring to the table? So I'm looking at how well do I match, and what we call that is fit. Is it a good fit? And then you kind of, what I didn't do previously, but what I do now, what I mentor a lot of people who are interested in being presidents, and what I tell them, the board picks the president, research the board and see what their background is and see what their interests are, so you can kind of get an understanding of, do I really want to work for these people?
Yeah.
Because they become your boss. You work for the board. The board doesn't run the institution. You run the institution for the board. And so, so they're your boss. And so then you have to make a decision. Is this going to be a good fit? Does my background and personality fit with theirs? And, are we going to get along? Are we going to, be able to work as a team together? Because you need support. And so if you have ideas that are a mismatch to the board's background, then that's not a good fit. More than likely, they're not going to select you. So, and then you need to find people on the board through your network to see if there are people in your network that know board members. So,
gotcha.
Yeah, because everything is about relationships. So aren't you more comfortable with hiring somebody that somebody else knows? So, so if you're an unknown, then that kind of gives people some discomfort. We're like, well, she's got a great resume, but who knows her? I need to call somebody that I know so I can feel more comfortable. So that means that you probably, as a professional, educational professional or higher ed professional, should be doing things in your profession. So like your K through 12, like I said, relationships, working with your
Right.
legislators, superintendents, assistant superintendents, principals, are those conferences, statewide conferences where you start building that network of people who know you, because then the more people you know and know what a great person you are, and understand your skill set, then they might know somebody on this board 5 years later who can really influence that decision.
Gotcha. Okay. So relationship building, people need to know that early on.
Yes.
I'm talking to my son who's 17, he's a rising senior, and we have conversations almost every day just about, hey, who are those teachers that you have right now that you think would write a great recommendation letter for you? Because I mean, it won't be all of your teachers, that everybody has like different temperaments.
Exactly.
But I talked to him about relationship building, and I have to remind him, like, hey, and I think sometimes parents don't think about this, and you have to be very intentional. But whenever I am in a position where I receive some type of help to get there, which is almost all the time,
Right.
I make sure I tell him, like, hey, this is how we got here, or this is how I got this. I knew this person who knew that person. And one time that teen angst came out, and they're always scrolling on TikTok. He's like, oh, so what term did he throw at me? But he was like, oh, so you just got somebody just basically helped you get there. I was like, it's like that all the time. Like, don't let people tell you it's not good. I said it didn't mean that I wasn't qualified. It just meant nobody else knew me. Somebody needs, you need to know people that are in rooms full of people that don't know you. Somebody needs to, it's not about, and someone told me this years ago, it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. And you can't always rely, because I told him, I said, I know Beyonce, she don't know me. Me, I don't know. I love Beyonce, but she does not know me. She cannot speak me up in rooms that I need to be spoken up in. So,
and you'd be surprised how, the longer you're on the planet, those early relationships come back around. And you just don't know, like your classmates, you don't know who's going to be doing what 10, 15 years from now, but you knew them in college, or, or people that you knew in your, in your work experience, or in your social networks, like sororities and fraternities and other types of service organizations. You meet people there who have similar interests, and they know a lot of people as well. So it's all of that in terms of, networking and being able to facilitate those conversations. I always like it when students tell me, or I'll ask them, I say, well, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And I had one student when I was at FAMU, and she says, I've never been to New York. I've always wanted to go there. I think I want to work there. And I was like, oh, okay, I can make that happen. And so then I facilitated. One of my colleagues had an environmental program at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, and I sent her there for the summer. I mean, and facilitated that opportunity. And so, you just never, so if I didn't know that that's what you wanted to do, I wouldn't have reached out to my colleague and say, do you have any open slots in your summer internship program, summer research program? And she's like, oh yeah. I was like, oh, okay, let's establish an MOU so you can have a partnership to do this. And so I do that all the time.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I experienced that firsthand. And I told my son this because he tried that. The word he threw out to me was nepotism. He was like, "So you are." I said, "Okay, you have nepotism going on every day in this household because because the way because you're my family member. I'm helping you in all kinds of ways."
Wow.
But I tell people, and I told him this, and I said, "Remember when I was in Minnesota?" And it came from, I remember our conversation like it was yesterday. It was at the Miss Stillman, I think it was like at the pageant maybe. And it was afterwards. And I just mentioned, you just asked me how I was doing. And I said, yes, well, my boy at that, now he's my husband. At that time, he was my boyfriend. I said, oh, he's got this job with the NFL and he's working with the Minnesota Vikings. And I'm just talking, to me, it's just like a little side conversation. And I remember you saying, oh, I have a friend that's at the University of Minnesota. And to be honest, when you told me that, it's not like I didn't believe you, but in my mind, I didn't have that expectation. I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna, she's telling me that to let me know, like it was like a negative thought, but I just said, okay, oh, she's just let me know, she knows somebody up there. Um, and I just left it alone. Like I didn't think anything else of it, honestly. And then I got that email in the middle of the night. It was this long chain where you had reached out on my behalf asking about, hey, do you have something going on at the University of Minnesota? And when I saw that, and I told my son this, I said, look, when I saw that and I saw what I needed to do, I think I did not have much time because I still needed to write a letter of interest. And I took that seriously. I remember not going to sleep that night. I got up and I started typing away and creating that letter of interest. Okay, this is what I want to do. This is why I would be a good fit for this program. Because I said, if Dr. Warrick went out of her way to reach out about me to these people, they have no clue who I am. I was typing that letter. I read it. So I proofread that letter so many times. I said, oh goodness, because it was Dr. Michelle Allen. I had to go and I'm like, this is a medical doctor I'm having to write to. I'm like, my letter has to be on point. Put my packet together. I didn't have much. I think it was maybe 48 hours I had to get all my stuff together. And I said, I'm not letting Dr. Warrick down. If she did all, because that was a long chain you sent me. It was a long email chain of your conversations back and forth. And when I finally got word back that I was accepted, I was so excited because I got my flight paid for. I got my room and board paid for to stay on campus. And I got money. I got a stipend that summer. And that was my first time working in around like medical doctors. And it was also my first time using a standing desk. That was something I had never experienced before. And now I have one right here in my house.
Oh, wow.
A convertible desk. It was a desk that I could stand up in because, you're reading all day long. I cannot sit the whole time. I need to be able to stand up. And I thought that was so cool. And I still got into the program a little late. So when in my placement, they didn't have like a designated area for me. So Dr. Allen said, well, don't worry. We'll put you in this room where some doctoral students were using. That's why I had such a fancy setup, because it was for doctoral students.
Oh, wow.
And there was one person behind me. And it was so cool. He was a Black male studying for his doctorate. And I was always so nervous, like, oh my goodness, I'm in here. I don't want to be in your way. He was like, oh no, you're doing great. He was like, oh, you're in a great position. Like he was so giving me such great affirmations, like, no, you're in a great spot. The person that uses that desk, they're not going to be here for the rest of the summer, so you're good. That was a really eye-opening place to be. And then of course I got to see my boyfriend. That was my perk. And I got to see my boyfriend like every weekend. Once I finished all my studies, he would come pick me up and then show me around Minneapolis and surrounding area. And I was like, oh, this is a nice place. But and one of the things that the program director told me when I got there and I'm getting out my paperwork and I'm still looking like, oh, am I supposed to be here? I get my dorm key and they put us in the brand new dorm too. So we were in a brand new dorm and it had like the best food court downstairs and I had a food card. Like, so I was able to eat. I didn't have to really spend my money for anything when I got there. I was making money and I made the most of it. I kept hearing, oh, when I went down to eat for that first night I was there, there was a young lady I saw and she had a Prairie View shirt on. And I said, hey, you're at HBCU, and she says, hey, we just hugged like we had known each other forever. And then we met some more people. Oh yeah, I'm from Howard. There were a couple of us there. And so the program director, we had like our orientation later that day. And the program director spoke to me and she says, we had one more HBCU slot that we could not find anybody for. So we're really glad you came. And I was like, wow, that I was able to fill that last slot. And then the dean, I think that you had reached out to that got me there. He found the funding for me to get me into the program. I made sure I reached out because I wanted to thank him personally, for finding a way to get him. I'm like, this man does not know me. He just knows a lady that knows me. And I remember reaching out to him. I got his email address, reached out, and I said, hey, I would love to come by and just say hi. And he says, thank you so much. He says, actually, today is my last day and I'm packing up. I'm going to another school. And I was like, the fact that I got in just in time, right before he was heading to a new assignment, that was great. And I'm like forever grateful for you just speaking me up to people that didn't know me. And I tell people all the time, like, you do not burn bridges, do the best you can. Don't be afraid to talk to people that are above you. Like I love talking to people that make more money than me or are smarter than me because they are able to see things in me I don't see and can put me in places that I probably wouldn't be able to put myself in because I don't know everything, so I appreciate that. That was from the bottom of my heart. That was a great experience. I experienced so much just in terms of research. And even Dr. Allen was like, oh, you knew this? Oh, I was like, yeah, we have to, I have a thesis class we have to take, and she had never met anybody that had to write an undergraduate thesis. So the lingo they were using, I was familiar with. We were doing qualitative research, and I had always done quantitative research. And she says, yeah, when we had the conversation that we had around the differences between that, she was like, oh, this is really refreshing. I hadn't spoken to anybody, an undergraduate student, about the differences. And I said, yes, it's actually a lot harder. So when people talk about qualitative, I'm like, it seems easy, but when you're really trying to aggregate, like, numbers don't lie. So it's easy to me to get, you can easily make a good bar graph, but when you're dealing with a bunch of survey questions and answers, you have to sort that data out differently and look at it. And you have to almost transform it into numbers in your head, which is difficult to do for many people. So for a lot of people. So I appreciate that. That was a great experience. I will never forget. I'm still connected to some people. One of the other students that was in that program, because it was a multicultural summer research opportunity program. So all the students that were in the program, we're all from different backgrounds, Black and brown students. At the end of the program, they took us on like a yacht ride.
Oh wow!
Yes, it was top tier. There are still some things I will like. I'm keeping that to myself until when I found out more about it, I'm like, oh, y'all need to get in. That was a great program. And I tell people all the time that have criticisms about HBCUs and whether students, how they prepare us for life. Well, I say, well, to me, I believe my HBCU prepared me because I was able to participate in these programs during the summers that was definitely diverse. I still got to experience a PWI, during the summer. And they had these special programs that where they were like, oh, it was specifically geared towards Black and brown students in those fields. And none of us were like just not qualified for what we were doing. We were all really good students. And a lot of my friends, like I was saying, one of my friends that was in the program, he just finished, he just got his doctorate. So now he's a dentist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he just posted that on, we're Facebook friends, and so proud of him. I was like, oh, you're so awesome. And, we still comment on each other's posts and stuff. So him, and then it's, we're still connected. We have it was a good group of us. And we all had that same, a little fear, about like, ooh, do I really belong here? Because we're seeing how much money these people are spending on us. And so that's a heightened level of responsibility that I feel like we had, because so we had to make sure, oh, I'm on top of my stuff. We had to have our study sessions. We're doing this research. It was just so much. Like when I had to get my poster created, they said, oh yeah, we have two posters. We have a travel poster we're going to make for you. And then you get I was like, and I remember telling one of my professors at Stillman, they said, oh, they made you two posters. I said, yeah, I had a cloth poster that they told me I could travel with, and I could fold it up in my luggage. And so I could travel with it. And I was like, this is awesome. I still have it, actually. So
Good.
Thank you again for that, for that experience.
And that's what I think. I hope that other higher education leaders understand how important it is to expose our students to various opportunities, because I think what people do initially is when students decide upon a major and they, and they're like, oh, well, they're majoring in this. And I'm thinking back to when I decided to go into pharmacy school. I was 17 years old. Mm-hmm. And I had a very limited view of the world. And so just like I mentioned previously, why I wanted to do pharmacy. But I didn't find out until my pharmacy was located in a medical building. And down the hall from me was a radiologist. Mm-hmm. I had never heard of a radiologist before. I didn't know that there was a certain doctor that all they did was review x-rays and evaluate those. They don't see patients. They do all of that. And I was like, oh, wow, if I had known there was such a doctor as a radiologist, I might have gone to medical school, but I limited myself because of a lack of exposure.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so important to give students these opportunities outside of their campus, outside of their comfort zone, to expose you to various different places and people and disciplines, so that you can make an informed decision about your future and what you might like to do. And I know you're going to ask me about my nonprofit I started, and that's a good segue, because that's why I started the Society for Diversity in the Biomedical Sciences, because I want to really provide opportunities for students to do just that. To create opportunities where they would have exposure to other disciplines and other areas, because I recognize you're limited just like me. And high school hasn't changed that much. When I go out when I used to go to college fairs, and I would operate the table, and I like talking to the students, and I find out, I was like, well, what do you want to major in? And if somebody says bioengineering, and I was like, okay, who do you know that's a bioengineer? I know that came from somewhere, but most students are still very traditional.
Right. And so, okay, let's I'm going to talk more about your nonprofit in a moment. I want to talk about your a few things about your presidency at Stillman. So you were the first female president at Stillman College, located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, my alma mater. For everybody out there, just full disclosure. Um, can you talk to us about some of your? I'm going to back up a little bit because I know you'll have to probably talk a little bit about how you got that position, because I was there before you came and I remember you being interim. And I also remember because I was a student leader on SGA at the time. So I do recall when they were going to bring in some people to interview for the permanent position. And myself and other students were like, we want Dr. Warrick to stay. And other people were telling us, like, I don't think she wants to stay. I think she's, content with being interim and she's going to move on to something else. And so I remember us sitting up thinking, like, hey, y'all, how are we going to convince her to stay? Like, I don't know these other two guys, because we, sat in and we're like, I don't know. I don't like him. We like Dr. Warrick. How can we convince her to stay? So can you talk about some of your, like, how you got into that role and your key initiatives while you were there, and how you navigated those challenges?
Yes. Well, I think the so the current president had submitted his resignation to end his time there in December.
Right. Yeah.
And the board, the search for the next president hadn't started. They were just really getting started. So they didn't have a candidate for presidency yet. And so they used the search firm TMC Squared, which is Thurgood Marshall College Squared, which was a brand new executive search firm. And the CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund called me, and he said, Cynthia, I want you to go to this interview at Stillman. They need you. And I was like, well, where is Stillman? And what is that? I hadn't really heard of Stillman before. And he says, oh, it's in Alabama. This was like October, November, before, the president was leaving. And I was like, okay, just for you. And I had just started my nonprofit, and I was just really getting ready to start doing some things with that. And so I went to the interview, and it was really just the board chair and several other board members. I guess they had a separate committee for the interim president job, and that they had the regular search committee that you were on for the permanent president. And so they were like, well, we just need you here for 6 months, and I need you to come January 1. And and we had, we just have to have someone in between when this new president will start. You have to have a president, especially for SAC-COC accredited institutions. And they didn't have anybody else that on campus that they wanted to be the interim or acting. And so I went to the interview really prepared to not get the job.
Really?
Yeah, because I was like, I'm getting ready to start my own thing, and I really want to do this. I'm just coming because the CEO called me, and I want to help him. So I said, and so I had sent some questions to the board, and none of them were answered.
Really?
Yeah. So when I got there, I was like, well, I sent you some questions. And I was like, oh, yeah, we'll get you some answers to that later. And so they were asking me various questions. And I was being my direct self and trying not to get the job. And then, and then they offered me the job. And so I said, okay. So it was a 6-month appointment.
So what kind of questions, I know you probably can't tell us the exact
Yeah.
questions, but what types of questions were you asking them that they didn't answer?
About finances, about, because I had already been a president, so I know, the problems. So I'm asking about the enrollment and problems and things that I couldn't get on the internet,
Gotcha. Yeah, you need some background stuff like, okay, tell me why you really need me.
Right. That's pretty much, it's my husband called me the cleanup woman. So, those are the kind of environments that I usually go into, that there's some kind of crisis and some things need to be changed, and getting things ready and moving in the right direction for the new president. And so I said, okay, I'll do a 6 months. Because the campus, I was really surprised. It was a beautiful campus. I had never been there before. And I liked the board chair. He was really committed to the institution. And, Chairman Driver, he's just, he was an alum, and he was a really good leader. And he was willing to go out on his own to do whatever he could to save Stillman. And so I took it for 6 months, and then they had those interviews you talked about, and the 2 finalists, and neither had been a president before. And I think that was in March or April.
Yep.
And I had been working since January. So the board chair called me, and he says, I just talked to the 2 candidates. I just interviewed the 2 candidates, and having worked with you for these past few months, I just don't think they can do this. And he said, I'd like for you to submit your application for the presidency. And I was like, oh. I was like, well, couldn't I be a mentor for the new president? Couldn't I just, y'all pick somebody and I'll work and help them?
Avoid.
And, they're like, no, that wouldn't be fair. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So I talked to my husband, and I said, well, the chairman wants me to stay. He doesn't think these 2 candidates are going to be able to do it. And he says, yeah, well, if you leave, they're not going to make it. And I was like, oh, okay. So give me the guilt trip.
Right. Guilt trip.
Yeah.
So, and that's so interesting, because that Mr. Driver told you that, because in that meeting, it was like a public meeting for the 2 candidates and the students. We were in there, and there were some faculty members sprinkled in there as well. But they each gave their presentations, because I think this was after their initial interviews with the board, and they gave their spiels. And even as students, we were kind of like, they don't feel like they really know what they're doing. I mean, I remember specifically saying that about one of them. I'm like, I don't think he understands what it means to be a president at HBCU. And we're talking, but I'm like, even students at that point, because we were so afraid, and I was in the education program, and I had finally gotten to a point where I'm like, I really loved my time at Stillman. I was afraid. I had started looking at classes at Alabama State to see which ones would transfer. And I was honestly thinking, like, okay, next fall, I'm probably going to have to transfer to Alabama State to finish my degree, because I was so unsure about the future of Stillman. And that was a scary place to be for me. And, like a lot of people do, that I was back in college as a non-traditional student. So the stakes were high for me. I had I have a son at that point. I'm a single mom. I'm like, okay, I had a certain time period in my head that I needed to be done with this so I could go ahead and get my son and myself into a better situation financially and where I wanted to be professionally. So I remember thinking that I was like, oh, if they're going to hire one of these guys, we're not, I don't know if we'll survive, just like Mr. Driver was saying. So we were like, man, they can't keep Dr. Warrick. We were starting to think like, okay, the board is crazy. If they don't find a way to keep Dr. Warrick here because the students liked you, we were thinking like, y'all need to get it together. I remember, I think one of us saw Mr. Driver and we were like, hey, can Chairman Driver, are you gonna keep Dr. Warrick? You need to. He smiled. He was. He kept his cards because he was like, oh yeah, well, she's interim right now. I don't know if she wants to. I don't know if she wants to be anything besides. I remember he gave that kind of like, I don't know if she wants to stay. That kind of thing. So, yeah, that was a really interesting. I remember those two. And I don't want to talk. I don't even remember their names. I just remember I was like, they don't sound. One of them just sounded very unsure of himself, and then the other sounded really cocky. And he kind of made a comment about HBCUs that was kind of disparaging.
Oh,
and or like just rub us the wrong way. And that's how we're like, okay, he never went to an HBCU, so he just doesn't know. Like that particular comment was kind of like a little. No, he could have kept that to himself. And we were like, they need to keep Dr. Warrick. She's already been here. She knows what's going on. That was our thing. So you finally took that position, it was so can you tell us a little bit about how you navigated some of the challenges that came on with the role? Because, you were kind of building a plane while it was on fire. It's to say the least, I would say.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I always focus on what the students need, and talk to you all and ask you what you want or what you don't like. Or I think that communication is important. And I try to find individuals to work on my team who also would listen to students and really work as a team across different silos, etc., to solve the various problems, because you had problems with the food, problems with housing. There were just lots of issues going on. And of course, you had this big HBCU cap finance loan that was in default. You had a loan with the city of Tuscaloosa for $1 million that the previous president had signed over the whole campus for just $1 million. And so I was like, oh my, I've got to get some help. And so I have worked at 2 other institutions that had similar, not as bad, but similar issues, and really pulled those folks together, the ones who could come, and then others I recruited, and tried to get them on board and that's what's important, because you have people who building those relationships over time is so critical, because finding people who will come and work in a remote place. And people from Tuscaloosa probably don't think it's remote, but
it's remote.
It is. And I mean, you don't have your own airport, so it's remote.
Right.
Some place that doesn't have its own airport, then that's a remote location. And persuading qualified and talented people to come is really, so you have to be flexible and trust and beg and persuade the right people to come and help you, because you can't do it by yourself.
Okay, so what's before we go on to our next topic to talk a little bit more about your nonprofit, what are some things, some successes that you had at Stillman that you're really proud
Mhm.
of, that you want to make sure, hey, people know this. This is while I was at Stillman, we were able to accomplish this.
Yeah, well, we did a lot my last year, and I was just so excited. The dance team performed in London. The
Wow.
band performed at the Kennedy Center and the Sousa Festival. It was the first HBCU at the Sousa Festival at the
Mm,
Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. The choir performed at the Potter's House.
yeah.
And, in other places, San Francisco and,
Hmm.
and Detroit. And so that was in South Carolina. So lots of
Hmm.
different places all over. And, and then the baseball team played at Pittsburgh Pirates Park against Wiley College. So at a
Wow.
national Major League Baseball stadium. And
Wow.
and then the Honda Quiz Bowl team won the national championship. So that just
Yes.
topped it all off.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, you had some great times.
Yeah.
And I can so next let's talk about your Society for Diversity in Biomedical Sciences.
Right.
You spoke earlier about how you had just pretty much gotten it off the ground right before you went to Stillman. Can you talk a little bit more about some
Mhm.
initiatives that you have, um,
Yeah.
and what people can kind of look forward to, or how people
Mhm.
can get connected with the nonprofit?
Yeah. So now I've developed a consortium of
Mhm.
HBCUs through my nonprofit, and I'm waiting to hear on a grant that I've submitted to provide opportunities for these students at the various HBCUs who I'm partnering with. So I have one from Texas, one from Mississippi, Louisiana,
Mhm.
South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. So there's six states, and I'm about to add Tennessee, I think.
Mhm.
So those are the schools, and it's basically the presidents that I've developed great relationships with and know them, and know that they will select great students like you were to participate because I'm putting my professional relationships on the line when I facilitate these kinds of
Mhm.
partnerships. And so I'm waiting to hear. I should hear something sometime later this summer. So
Mhm.
I hope, we'll get funded and then we can start exposing students to more biomedical research at major research institutions and cover the cost and all of that same thing you experience. Because I think it
Mhm.
really changes students' perspective because a lot of young people who are pre-med or pre-dent, they're like, I want to be a medical doctor. And it's like, and never been in an office other than being a patient, never seen a
Yeah.
different doctor than a pediatrician,
Mhm.
never been exposed to a hospital or the work that's required in medical school, having
Mhm.
that work ethic and understanding you're making a huge sacrifice of time and
Mhm.
resources because you go into so much debt. But
Yeah.
getting a PhD in a biomedical science at a major research institution, you can be fully funded, so you don't have to borrow like 200,000, 300 to be an MD.
Hmm. Yes, and I think that's really valuable that your nonprofit pushes that, because there are other science fields, medical science fields that you can go into, like you were discussing or talking about earlier, radiology.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially when you said you're a germaphobe, like, oh, if I had known I could have done this, I would have gone into that field. And that's I've had my own experience in that, I didn't know what a classroom facilitator was until really I started in my first school, because even though I had done substitute teaching and I had, had plenty of experience in classroom settings, I didn't realize that there was this other position in the school that was like a coach for the teachers on campus. And
Mm-hmm.
depending on what district you're at, I was at a district where you still had your coach for the teachers, but you also had a technology coach, which I loved. I was leaning more towards that because this was a separate individual that just did workshops on technology, on the different applications for teachers to use in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so that freed up time with the coaches where they could only focus on instruction and instructional coaching, like, hey, this is something you need to do, or pacing and creating lesson plans. So it's really, I think, having a program that helps expose students to those different avenues and alleyways and freeways in a particular field is really good.
Yeah.
Because I know because medical school, just going down that one field is uh, that's a lot of debt. And even just in my own experience with children, with having children, finding specialists, there are different specialty fields that you don't see a lot of Black and brown people in, like looking for dermatologists, or these different niche areas that and I think that would be something great for people to get exposed to before they decide to put a lot of money into an education, because that's what I think maybe may pigeonhole some students, because they feel like, oh well, I've already picked something and I can't really change it, even though I'm in my third year now, before I realize, oh, there's this whole other career path that I could be taking that costs less money. you
Right.
know, I have a friend who's a physician. He's Stillman alum, physician assistant. I did not know about that field. I did not know. He was like, yeah, so they're basically the ones that run the Doc in the Box places.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, that's a whole business. He was like, yeah, so we're the ones that have to run that. And, I don't have to do all those years of medical school. It's still a lot of schooling, but I was like, I did not know that at all.
Yeah.
So it's really cool.
Yeah. So that exposure, I think, is critical so that young people can, um, you have all of this information at your fingertips every day.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have the exposure, you don't have an understanding of how to find it, what to look for, where to look for it, or who, might be looking for somebody like you to
Mm-hmm.
be in their program. So that's what I do, is connect students to opportunities. I guess my biggest disappointment is when they don't take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's not that I'm expecting they're going to do that, but I want them to do something. And
Mm-hmm.
so I guess I'm kind of frustrated with students who are taking these gap years,
Mm.
kind of. And then I'm trying to figure out, well, is this a structured gap year, or are you just going to be at home on the couch?
Right, you just hanging out.
Yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather, put you in a summer or a year-long internship or a research experience so you could get exposed to some other things, to
Mm-hmm.
have other ways of informing what you might want to do that,
Mm-hmm.
might be a good fit. It might be a good going to a different place where, there may not be a lot of Black people, but there's some nice people there, and
Yeah.
you might like them. It
Yeah.
might be, some place that you may like to stay, and it doesn't mean that you have to stay there forever. But
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, I think sometimes students think, oh, well, if I do that, I'm gonna have to do that forever. But
Mm.
I think I'm a good example of, I started in pharmacy and then I moved into higher education and then higher ed leadership. So,
Mm-hmm.
and now nonprofit management. So, I mean, I think I can say, and as a baby boomer, I'm probably an outlier because that's the generation who did stay in one job for
Yeah.
30, 40 years. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the Stillman job is probably the place that I've been the longest of any of my
Oh,
jobs throughout my whole career. And that was
wow.
6.5 years.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah,
Wow.
yes. That's the longest place that I've been in one place for the longest. I think the next longest I was at HEB for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my pharmacy for 5. I think I was at Elizabeth City State for 5 or 4.5 years. So yeah, so I think I accept change
Mm-hmm.
very better than most people, and I'm not afraid of change or not afraid
Mm-hmm.
of moving and changing environments. So when people say, I want to do this and I want to move up, and then I said, okay, then you need to be willing to move.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a saying out here in Texas. I'm at a smaller school district now, and there's a saying here that you have to move out to move up.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of people like administrators that come from, you know, great distances. They may have come from a Frisco ISD or a Fort Worth ISD, and they come in, they say, well, I had to move out to be able to move up in positions, because sometimes if you're in a big in a big district, you don't get as many opportunities because you're a small fish in a big pond.
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting to see how that manifests itself. And you can't be afraid to move, like I'm in a very rural district. And so people coming from a Dallas or Frisco ISD to a district where, like, our superintendent was born and raised here
Oh, wow.
and came up through the ranks in the district, and this will be her first full year or her second full year as superintendent. And and sometimes you think like, oh, maybe they won't be the right fit when it's somebody that's from the area, um, but they value that here. That's what I noticed. And you cannot be afraid to move around and to see different things, because you learn so much.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about funding before we close.
Mhm.
um, I want you to talk about grant writing, and because that's a skill that I have not learned yet, and that's something that I want to really learn before I leave this earth. I really want to learn how to write grants.
Well, you
And
have, because you did a thesis.
is
And
that what that is?
a grant proposal is basically a thesis.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So you've
Well,
learned how to write a grant. You
because
just,
it's intimidating.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, and I always say that every time that Alpha Kappa Alpha has the like leadership seminars, I
Mhm.
always try to sign up for the grant writing one, and I never get in before it fills up. I'm like, man, I never get in. I didn't get in this year either for Boule. And so I want, that's something that I want to kind of see firsthand. So can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about the grant writing process, because
Well,
you've raised
I
a lot of
think
money?
I think the what you need to know first is what you're good at, because you have people who are going to be reviewing, and the first thing they want to know is, have you ever done this before?
Mm.
And so if your bio sketch or CV or resume doesn't have stuff that you're proposing to do, then more than likely people aren't going
Mm.
to take a risk on you, because basically it's your experience that they're betting on. That if you can do this project, what have you done in your past that demonstrate you could do this, and we give you all this money to do it. And so that's the first thing they'll look at. And then if you haven't, they'll look at, okay, who are the people on your team? Have they done it? Have they done this before? So you have to have a mentors or other people that carry the areas that you're going to implement. Have they done that before? If they've done that before, then you have a much better chance of getting the funding. So it's pretty competitive. And you pretty much just justify why you should get it. Why should you give me these thousands of dollars to do this project? And so that's just like your thesis question. Well, this is an issue, and this is the background of this community, and they need this, and I'm filling this gap that's needed in this community and with this project. And so you collect the evidence and do the lit review and do that background and talk about why is this important? Why is it relevant? And why should we give this to you instead of somebody else? And that's all it is.
See, I would have never thought about that. My anxiety around grant writing is just literally the structure of the writing itself. That's all I could think about. I didn't think about like, well, you need to think about who's on your team and your the personal background or professional background of the person that's writing the grant.
Exactly.
Did not know that.
Yeah, and what project you're going to be doing. So basically, you're what I've done is really use my network. I've been around for a long time. So I've got colleagues who will do stuff and participate, collaborate on projects. And so that's key, so it all goes back to building those relationships. And, like if you're going to do some kind of project that involves dentists, going back to the people and saying, hey, would you be willing to do a workshop on how to become a dentist, and why were you successful in dental school? Or, will you be able to do that? And so pulling in your network and people who have those experiences that you don't have to facilitate, whatever project it is you want to do.
Okay, awesome. Well, actually, I was going to make that my last question, but my last question, because I wanted to kind of delve a little bit more into your family life. And this is just for people that are ambitious, especially the moms out there that have families, and even if they're single moms, because there was a significant part of your career where you were a single parent to your two children, right? Can you talk about some of maybe a couple of the biggest challenges that you faced, and give us some practical guidance of how you overcame them, and like maybe advice to other people, hey, that are seeking terminal degrees, and they're, I'm a single mom seeking a terminal degree, and I'm having to teach, and I have these two children.
Right. Well, I think you have to be a planner, and you have to think about, the time management and how much time and when you're able to devote that time. And so when we were moving around to various places, the first thing I do is research the school districts to find out, okay, where are the best schools? Because I want to make sure that my children get a great education. And when you're a student, you can't afford private school like when I was working. So I need to find the best public schools. And then you need to find a school that's convenient and housing that's convenient to the school, so my children could walk to school. And that's what I did in most places. I found either housing that they could walk to school, or that there was a bus that was going to take them to school. So they had that transportation, because I knew I may not be able to do that.
Right.
So that's, that's the number one thing is really I focused on what's the best education they can get. And then everything else is, just support. I remember one time my son came home and he was failing math, and I'm like, okay, that's stop. I mean, you don't have an excuse. You got a mom that knows math. So, you're going to have to do this homework and read the chapter and do the book, do what you need to do. And so you just have to be a good parent. You have to spend the time and really support them and go to the school for all their programs, talk to their teachers. My daughter was a real challenge in school, so teachers would always call me, and I was like, okay, this is what you have to do with her. And they're like, oh, really? So you partner with the teacher, and then they pretty much, I'm sure that there are parents who are going to tell you, well, this is the best way to get to them. One teacher, my son really liked pretty teachers. And then when they weren't so pretty, he wouldn't do the work.
What?
So, yeah, I mean, it was like, oh my gosh. So this one teacher came to see me, and she was like, how do I reach him? I know he's a good student because last year he was in this lady's class and he was the top student. Of course, she was pretty and young. And then now he's in my class and I can't get him to do anything. And I said, well, he really likes Indians. He's fascinated with Native Americans. And she says, oh, really? Well, I'm a Comanche. And I was like, wow. Oh, well, if you tell him that, you've got him. And so she started giving him assignments and stuff. And then they just became very close. And he started doing the work. And so I think it's knowing your kids and knowing what's going to connect with them and how, and what's important to them and really putting them in a good environment where they can learn. So what that involved was paying more rent, you're going to have to make sacrifices and because the best school districts are in the most expensive neighborhoods. And so that's what you'll have to do. And you'll have to do more commuting in terms of where you're located based on, the conveniences should be for the kids, not for you. So that's basically how I looked at it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's some really good advice. And it's hard, when I went back to Stillman, it's really important to have that support system. Because, and it was so great when I was at Stillman and we, finally got the house on campus for the single moms on campus. And my son just so happened to be in the same grade as the dean of the music program, is his son. And so their mom was able to walk them to school, and she made sure she got them after school. And I was so grateful to her. I was like, you're amazing. And, if it rained, she drove them. And so that kind of allowed me to kind of have my mind off of, okay, is he getting to school safely? Is he getting back from school safely? And there were some times, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for this, but it's too late. I have my degree. This is just about relationships. I had a good relationship with the CAF, with the workers there. And there were times where I'm busy doing stuff and I knew my son would be hungry and he would get my food card and just go eat my meal for that day. In the evening. And the lady, she was like, it's fine. He can just use yours. And I made sure I gave him, I had to put a little lanyard on it because the first time I gave it to him, he lost my ID. Oh, he was like, I don't know. And thank goodness, Miss Pearlie. She still had it. She remembered because I always spoke to her. I always asked her how she was doing. And she had it up there up front. She says, yeah, I think he left it on the table. And I said, thank you so much. After that, I found a way to put it inside a little lanyard and it would be hanging up by the door. And I say, okay, If I'm not home, if I'm not back by this time, you run up to the calf and get some food. And everybody knew, like, hey, Rose, I saw your son. He was up there eating. I'm like, okay, that's just me. I would give up
Mhm.
my meal to make sure he had something to eat, and then I would get home and have him tucked in and everything like that. So I
Yeah.
hope I don't get anybody in trouble, because that's my baby was eating off my meal plan.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because one of the things at Stillman that I found out just talking to students, and then we did Tyler Davidson started working after he graduated, and we did went to financial aid to find out how many students did we have who were parents.
Mm-hmm.
And we had over 100 student parents
Mm-hmm.
at Stillman. And so we were able to use that information to get a grant from the Aspen Institute to support student parents. Yeah,
Wow.
so we got a multi-year grant. I think it was $75,000 to
Mm.
support student parents. And
Wow.
yeah. And so things like that, when you're trying to solve specific problems and
Mm-hmm.
challenges, and really focused on making um, education accessible, and
Mm-hmm.
to non-traditional students. But 100 students at Stillman is a
That's a lot.
big number.
That's a
It was,
graduating class almost.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was really key.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad I feel like we can end on that really good note, because that is awesome. That $75,000. I know when I was at Stillman, having that support, because I was so involved on campus, and I said, it doesn't make any sense that I'm on this campus all the time and I cannot live on campus,
Mm-hmm.
because of this archaic rule in the rule books. And so I was really appreciative to you and everybody else that was supportive around creating a safe space on campus for those single moms like me that needed, a place to live, that was right there. And
Yes, I'm particular to student government
Mhm,
leaders,
mhm,
because I was in student government. And
mhm,
so I just think it's so important to support those students who really tend to be the voice of the student
mhm,
population. And so when you have a good relationship with your student government leaders, and students in general, where you're approachable and they feel that they can come and talk to you about their issues and their needs and what they would like to see, I think it's really important to listen, because to me, the student is the customer. It's their time and resources that they're using to get this education, and it's our job to make sure that we're successful.
Awesome. Well, you know what, Dr. Work, I really appreciate the time you've taken to speak with us today. I think I'm going to have you back, because there are still some questions. And that wraps up another enriching episode of Pearls of Pedagogy. A huge thank you to Dr. Cynthia Warrick, my college president, for sharing her remarkable journey and invaluable insights. From pioneering leadership at Stillman College to championing diversity in biomedical sciences, Dr. Warrick's story is really a testament to the transformative power of dedication, vision, and resilience. So, for our viewers and listeners who are educators, administrators, or just passionate about making a difference in education, I hope that you found today's conversation as inspiring and enlightening as I did. Remember, the path to impactful leadership is paved with persistence, purpose, and a commitment to lifelong learning. Before we go, I want to remind you to stay connected with us on social media for updates and sneak peeks into future episodes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube for inspiring content. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue to explore the dynamic world of education with another incredible guest. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and remember, every pearl of wisdom you gather along your journey is a step toward transforming education.